6 years ago, Chris Harris did a review on the 5-door version of this car, the BMW 3 Series. And he said, I quote, "Unless you can stretch to an M3 or a C63, I'd take one of these and waste leftover cash on a weekend toy." That's pretty high praise for a manual 2-litre diesel. But there is a reason for it. Let's have a look, shall we? My name's Tom, and you're watching Paragon Cars. Let's go. You might be surprised to hear, but in the engine bay is an absolute gem of a motor. As 2-litre diesels go, this has got to be one of the best. 190 bhp and an impressive 400 Nm of torque should get this car from 0 to 60 in just 7.1 seconds, even with a manual box. But what about real acceleration? What about the 30 to 70 sprint? Let's find out. Okie dokie, so how did we do? Well, after many runs, the best time I managed was 7 seconds dead. Sadly, that's not quite enough to make it onto our leaderboard, but don't think that tells the whole story though. This car has some pretty long gears for a diesel, and it's a manual, so once you're above 50, this car is as fast, if not faster, than the C220. Okay, let's look at the inside, because today we're quite lucky, as this is actually a fairly rare car. It's got Harman Kardon sound, heated electric memory seats, ProNav, auto fold mirrors, keyless entry, high beam assist, extended storage. You get it. But all this is connected to a wonderful 6-speed manual. A high-spec BMW with a manual? It's literally like having your cake and eating it. The rear seats are also one of the best for a coupe. Legroom is good and headroom is the best out of the German rivals Audi and Mercedes. As well as quality, amenities also make their way to the back. You have your own climate control and an armrest with fold-away cup holders. Volkswagen, please learn from this. Boot space is actually similar to the Audi A5 at 440 litres. The shape isn't quite as good, but you can fold the seats down to make for a very adequate amount of room. Right, let's get on the road so I can show you why this is one of my favourites. As usual, we're going to start off around town, move on to the motorway, and then do some twisty road driving. And that's where this BMW 420d will get quite interesting. But initial impressions then. So, typical BMW suspension. It's firmer than Audi and Mercedes' suspension systems, but it's still pretty compliant. It has a slight sporting edge to it. The steering is also really nice and light. This car has the adaptive steering option, so when you put it in Sports Plus, it gets that really stereotypical heavy steering feel. That didn't last long, did it? I'll try and fix that, but anyway. Another thing you have is start-stop, so if you're in neutral like I am now, the engine will just cut off. And it's actually alright in this car, the engine starts pretty quickly. Parking this 4 Series is actually made pretty easy by the fact you've got parking sensors all round. And for a coupe, the view out the back is actually pretty good. Steering lock is okay, it could be a little bit better I think. But we still managed to get in a pretty tight space in one go. Not bad if you ask me. Right, let's try and get that GoPro fixed. Okay, we're back. Now, even though this is a manual, driving around town is pretty easy. Because you've got a nice light clutch pedal, it just means changing gears is not really that hard. Okay, let's reset the trip computer and we can see what MPG we get on the motorway. Before we get on the motorway, let's have a look at how this BMW 420d handles a roundabout. I'm going to go into Sports Plus, this will give us dynamic traction. And one of my favourite things about this car is it'll actually turn on rev matching. Of course, then you get heavier steering, increased throttle response, yada yada yada. But auto rev matching makes this sort of a more usable manual. And coming off roundabouts, put your foot down. Remember folks, this is a 420D. This isn't no M4 and you can still go sideways in it. And the thing is, when it's wet, it's actually easier to drive than a higher power BMW. Plus that dynamic traction, it will let you slip, but it won't let you lose control. So it just allows you to have some fun, basically. For now though, we're going to go into Eco Pro, because this engine has some seriously impressive economy performance. So refinement then, that's something that a German coupe should do pretty well. And I have to say, yeah, this BMW 4 Series does a really good job of keeping the road noise and the wind noise out. Even though we've got those M Performance wing mirror caps, there's actually no wind noise coming from there. The only thing you do notice is it's just a tiny bit from up here, but it is like nitpicking really. In terms of visibility, well, even though it's a coupe, it's actually pretty good. And remember, the one big advantage a coupe has is the lack of B-pillar right next to your head. So checking your blind spot is actually really easy. Of course, then you've got the curved bits of glass in the wing mirror. Pretty much all German cars have this, and it just means you don't have to turn your head all the way around to check your blind spot. In terms of seat comfort, this BMW is actually pretty good. I'd say it's on par with Audi and Mercedes, although there's one thing this seat does do that the other cars don't, and you can adjust how tight you want the bolsters of the seat. So say you're doing some sporty driving, you can tighten them so you don't flop about in the seat on a twisty road, but then you can slacken them all the way off, so it feels like you're pretty much sitting in an armchair at home when you're sitting on the motorway. Then in terms of interior quality, this BMW is actually very good, you know. It may not have the super flashy bits that a Mercedes has, but the fit and finish is a level above, I would say, actually. You've still got squidgy materials on the door cards and on the dash, but everything just feels really solidly put together. My only tiny gripe would be there's sometimes tiny gaps between this bit of metal trim and the rest of the dash. This car seems to be alright though. Then other parts of comfort include the suspension and the steering. Thankfully on the motorway, that slightly sporty edge suspension settles down a lot on the motorway. Then the steering is still as light as it is around town. For some reason some BMWs like to tramline a bit, but I think that's actually an alignment issue. This particular one I'm driving seems to drive dead straight and doesn't want to wallow around in the road at all. Then a big plus for me is the drivability, and a lot of that is because the gear ratios and the engine are absolutely perfectly matched. We're just above 60 miles an hour right now, and let's say I want to change lanes, so I just put my foot down in 6th gear. That's 65 and that's 70, and I could have changed lanes if I wanted to. But the point is, it does exactly what you tell it to do, and there's no hesitation. The turbo is just ready to go at 1750 RPM, and funnily enough, that's pretty much what you sit at on the motorway most of the time in 6th gear. So you almost never have to change gear unless you're going slower than about 50 miles an hour. So of course then what you can do is just whack the cruise control on and then just chill out. For a manual car, it's absolutely fantastic. Then of course for those long road trips, you're going to need a good sound system. And thankfully the HK sound system, or Harman Kardon sound system, does do a pretty good job of delivering the goods. It's got really good mids, really good highs, the same as Audi's B&O system. The only thing that isn't quite as good is the bass. When you turn it all the way up to full volume, it doesn't quite have that nice thump that the B&O system has. But I would say it's about on par with Mercedes' Burmester system. Then if there were 3 specs, and I could only get 3 specs for this car, the first thing would have to be the ProNav screen. Definitely worth getting, and it makes just navigating the iDrive system much more fluid and much easier. Plus you get a lot more real estate to work with. Next up would have to be the electric seats. For some reason, BMW have decided to make the absolute worst manual seat option in their cars. Basically, the way it works is if you pull a lever, it just releases the seat completely. So if you're on the move and you want to lower the seat a bit, you basically have to hold yourself up and then lower yourself down slowly. It's not on a pump system like Audis or Mercedes. So getting these electric seats means you can move them on the move. You've got a memory function as well, so if you have, say, someone else driving the car, you can keep your seat position safe. And it makes a massive difference to daily driving. And the last thing would be the aforementioned Harman Kardon sound system. The disparity between the standard sound system and the Harman Kardon one is actually more than I thought it was going to be. The sound system isn't bad, don't get me wrong, but this Harman Kardon sound system just takes it up to a totally different level in terms of sound quality. Coming off the motorway, what was our final figure then? Well, we managed over 56 miles to the gallon. That is mighty impressive, even for a 2-litre diesel. And the figure's still going up. On a long journey, I reckon you'd get well over 60 mpg in this car, which means you could easily do over 700 miles on a single tank of diesel. Right then, let's get on some twisty roads. Okay, so I'm going to start off in Sports Plus, of course. This will give us a little bit of slip. As you saw in the 30 to 70 time, the gearing is quite long, which is why it did a slower time than quite a few other cars that it should have been quicker than, really. But realistically, it does feel a little bit quicker to me. And you can have so much fun in this car, it's ridiculous. Coming around these tight corners and just powering out of them, it just doesn't get better than this, really. With the power this car has got, it does an amazing job of utilising it. The steering and suspension just have a really nice flow to them on a B road. And as you can see, still getting up to 60 miles an hour, plenty quick enough. Rev matching just makes it a bit easier to focus on the steering and the throttle input. And do you know what? Out of all the cars I've driven down here, this is up there with one of the most fun. You don't need big power figures to have a lot of fun on a British B road. Like even coming around this roundabout here, you can anchor on the brakes, anchor on the throttle, and it just has that adjustability that other cars don't have. And you can carry serious speed through those corners. I remember, this is not an M car, it's not even an M Light. So just think, to have the same amount of fun in an M3, you're going to have to be going way faster than this. And at that point, it is just kind of dangerous, really. Whereas this, you can stay under the speed limit and have a little bit of fun with it. I'd say my only gripe with the way this car drives is the manual gearbox could just be a tiny, tiny bit better. It really doesn't like it when you try and change quickly. But I mean, it makes up for it by having a really good auto rev match feature. The thing is, if you're in comfort mode, it actually disables it, so you can drive the car how you want it, really. But even in third gear, you can come out of tighter corners like this, plant your foot, takes you all the way up to 60. In fact, this car's actually got more torque than an E46 M3. And that car was considered rapid back in the day. And then probably my last gripe with this car would actually be the steering wheel. It's just a tad too thick for my liking. Overall though, this is an absolutely fantastic daily driver to have. Even after all that B-road driving and draggy testing, we got 45 miles to the gallon. So what's the overall verdict then? Well, actually, let's get some context first. You can pick one of these up for under £20,000 with good spec and pretty low mileage, around 30,000. A similar M4 is literally over double the price. And you might say, well, of course it is, it's an M4. But let's just say you went with the 420D. It's still a fun daily driver after all. you'd be left with at least another £20,000 to spend on a proper track toy, like a Lotus or even a Caterham. And you know what? That is exactly what I would do. Because I have to say, this car has surprised me and made me realise having fun on your daily commute is most definitely possible. And you don't need ridiculous power figures to do just that. Thank you, BMW, for making a car that really does improve people's daily lives. As always, I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, give it a like, and why not subscribe? Not only can you see more videos like this, you can see all the cars we have for sale, which of course includes this lovely BMW. Anyway, my name's Tom, and you've been watching Paragon Cars. I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.